While some movies do leave behind cryptic clues and challenge the viewer to solve the mysteries for themselves, in many cases there's nothing to really figure out. The audience is invited to draw their own conclusions and no interpretation is invalid. Consequently, for as much as we do try to figure them out, staying up all night, making mad connections and piecing them together on a big conspiracy board so then we can make a big YouTube video about them, some films were just never intended to have an unequivocal conclusion, but still inspired scores of fans to search desperately for one anyway. I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are 10 movie endings you're not supposed to understand. Number 10. Joker. Joker makes it clear multiple times that you shouldn't trust anything you see. An entire subplot involving Arthur Fleck's quote-unquote love interest is revealed late in the game to be entirely fabricated and a piece of the clown prince of crime's own imagination, while Arthur's own understanding of his childhood is similarly a lie, a mere yarn spun by his abusive mother. This ambiguity extends to the ending as well, which sees Arthur, now fully embracing his Joker persona, shooting Robert De Niro's Murray Franklin on national television and inspiring a violent uprising which results in the death of Martha and Thomas Wayne. However, the film then switches and shows the Joker in Arkham discussing those same events with a psychiatrist. The scene intentionally makes you wonder if everything that just happened is a figment of a sick patient, or did it all happen and does this scene take place afterwards? Director Todd Phillips has avoided answering the question, and that's because the mystique has always been a part of the Joker character. The villain's origin story has never firmly been established, and instead he switches narratives depending on who he's talking to. Consequently, the ending invites the viewer to wonder whether or not what they've just seen is the Joker's real origin, or just another cruel joke. Number 9. No Country for Old Men. No Country for Old Men, a neo-western drama about bounty hunters and psychotic killers, ends not with a bloody shootout or an explosive set piece, but with a scene depicting an old man, just like in the title, murmuring into an increasingly cold cup of coffee. Most of the movie's character arcs have been wrapped up by this point, though not in your typical Hollywood way. Josh Brolin's Llewellyn Moss dies off screen, Javier Bardem's Anton is injured in a car crash but limps off over the horizon, never to be seen again, and Woody Harrelson perishes moments after his introduction. This leaves only Tommy Lee Jones's Sheriff Ed Tom Bell to bring the curtain down with a nuanced monologue about the dreams he had the night before. In one of them, he lost his money given to him by his late father, while in the other, he passed his dear-old dad, who he has now outlived by 20 years, on horseback on a mountain pass. Jones's dream descriptions are cryptic and open to interpretation, with some fans insisting they're a rumination on masculinity and aging, while others believe they're a eulogy for simpler times. Either way, there are no definitive conclusions to draw, other than the stone-cold fact that No Country for Old Men ends with an old man talking. Number 8. The Blair Witch Project. Taken out of context, there's nothing really especially chilling about a man staring at a wall and a camera dropping to the floor. Hell, that's pretty much what happens behind the scenes of every single video we do. But within the confines of found footage classic The Blair Witch Project, this situation is absolutely pant-wettingly terrifying. The film's ending, which leaves one character standing dead still in the corner of the room while another is seemingly attacked by something unseen, is a callback to the story of a sadistic child murderer called Rustin Parr, who is mentioned earlier in the movie. That killer would force one of his victims to face the wall while he dispatched the other. Consequently, the final shot, coupled with this information, made for a conclusion that was unsettling and mysterious in equal measure. But it would have been neither of those things if there was a definitive explanation hiding behind the ending. Having an actual witch or a murderer show up in the final act would only have turned Blair Witch into a generic horror movie. It's the fear of the unknown that makes it what it is, which is why the questions surrounding its conclusion should never, ever be answered, especially in the Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows. Number 7, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Where any Odyssey is concerned, the journey is always more important than the final destination, and that's absolutely true of Stanley Kubrick's mind-bending adaptation of 2001. The movie's narrative descends into complete incoherence when astronaut Bowman descends into a vortex of colors and finds himself in a strange new universe, and then in a room with an aged version of himself. And what is the deal with that star child anyway? Well, put simply, Kubrick abandoned logic in the final act in favor of hallucination hallucinogenic imagery, and the remainder of the movie becomes a purely visceral experience. The filmmaker posed questions, offered no definitive answers, and left the viewer to draw up their own theories about the weird and wonderful sights on show. 2001 left audiences guessing, theorizing, and debating heatedly, but nobody should have expected anything less from a movie exploring mankind's place in an unknowable universe. Number 6. Drive. Nicholas Winding Refn is a filmmaker who prefers to keep his movies open-ended, and that was the exact case with his pulpy crime drama, Drive, which left the fate of Ryan Gosling's unlikely hero ambiguous, for the most part anyway. Gosling's driver is last seen bleeding out behind the wheel, before speeding off over the horizon. Many fans pondered whether his character would ultimately reunite with Carey Mulligan's Irene, and some even speculated that he died shortly after the credits rolled. In reality, Drive's conclusion isn't one to ponder too deeply, as Refn's intention was to keep it open, but not necessarily heavy on ambiguity. The protagonist lives on to embark on other adventures, but appears destined to remain as lonely as he was when the film first began. The only difference is that he's now more aware of his potential for heroism. Refn, by his own admission, isn't a fan of the cliche happy ending, and in a movie as unconventional as Drive, nothing was going to end up wrapped in a neat package. Number 5. Lost in Translation. Lost in Translation's final scene, in which Bill Murray's Bob Harris whispers something unheard into the ear of Scarlett Johansson's Charlotte, is a bittersweet moment that became a cinematic touchstone. Masking Murray's final words to ScarJo as he bids her farewell was a stroke of genius on writer-director Sofia Coppola's part, because nothing she or anyone else could have come up with would have been as powerful as the viewer's personal take. Lost in Translation is subtle and nuanced throughout, and this conclusion is a perfect reflection of everything it stands for. Knowing for certain what Bob said to Charlotte as they parted ways would have only lessened its impact. Number 4. The Wrestler. Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler is the story of an aging sports professional as he struggles to come to terms with life outside of the ring. But it's also so much more than just that. It's an exploration of one man's unwillingness to leave his youth behind, and an examination of a battle we all must face eventually, growing old. The movie's finale sees Mickey Rourke's Randy the Ram Robinson return to the ring despite his doctor's warning that wrestling again could fatally undo the effects of his recent heart surgery. Before the curtain drops, Randy is seen mustering what little strength he has left to perform his trademark finishing move from the top ropes. The noise of the crowd gradually fades and the camera shifts to a shot of the arena's ceiling, leaving it uncertain whether the protagonist died doing what he loves in the ring. Whether the heart attack Randy appeared to be suffering from killed him or simply ended his flagging wrestling career is unimportant though. The point is that he went out in a blaze of his former glory, and that was as happy an ending as he could have hoped for. Number 3. The Prestige. Chris Nolan's The Prestige is all about Hugh Jackman's Robert Angier becoming obsessed with figuring out how Christian Bale's Alfred Borden is pulling off a seemingly impossible magic trick. His pursuit leads him to the conclusion that his rival must be using some form of real magic or science, and Angier ends up creating clones of himself to pull off the same trick, killing them each time the illusion is performed. It turns out at the end, however, that he shouldn't have overthought it as much, as Alfred simply has an identical twin that he's kept secret to preserve the illusion. So yeah, he looks a bit silly after, literally creating clones of himself to do the same thing. While Nolan does reveal this, there is still so many threads and ideas left ambiguous by the end, including red herrings and the intent of a few nameless characters who reappear throughout the film. And it's at this point I should hold my hands up and say that we're as guilty as anyone for painstakingly going over the movie with a fine-tooth comb. But the point of The Prestige is kinda to prove that there's nothing to be gained from that mentality. You don't need to know how Chris Nolan pulled off this trick to still enjoy and be in awe of it. And if you do look too closely at it, you'll probably end up as lost as poor old Robert. Number 2. Oldboy. Unable to deal with a reality where hypnotic trickery and manipulation has forced him into a carnal relationship with his own daughter, Oldboy's protagonist Dae-soo cuts out his own tongue and turns to hypnosis to strike these events from his memory. The final scene sees Dae-soo reunited with his daughter, but unease grips him and the viewer alike as his smile gradually fades, giving way to a look of anguish. Director Park Chan-wook's intention wasn't to inspire the viewer into detective work in search of definitive answers to the multiple questions this ending leaves behind though. The purpose of the conclusion was to leave room for assumption and speculation. Nobody knows whether the hypnosis was effective or not, whether it even took place, or how much time had elapsed by this point. Beyond Daesu's expression, there are no clues to suggest any of the theories that have sprung up around these questions are right or wrong, but the fact that they sprung up at all is no doubt what Chan-wook wanted. Number 1. Inception. The final scene of Inception sees Leonardo DiCaprio's Dom Cobb reunited with his children at his father's house, having seemingly escaped the dream within a dream limbo he was previously existing in. He sets down his totem, a spinning top he uses to distinguish dream from reality, in motion, and then turns his back on it. In the movie's final shot, the top stutters ever so slightly before the credits start to roll. Many fans left the theater fixated on whether the top was about to buckle over, which would reveal that Cobb was in the real world, or continue to spin and confirm that the reunion was just another of the protagonist's dreams. Hell, there have even been fan theories claiming that Cobb's wedding ring, and not the top itself, was actually his dream totem. While this discussion is healthy and can be stimulating, it's also kind of unnecessary, because the take-home point from Inception's final scene is that Cobb simply didn't care whether or not the top would continue to spin. At that moment, he was happy, and that was enough. Inception is keen to stress the value of dreams as personal and meaningful experiences, so in the context of the movie, it was irrelevant whether Cobb was with his children in the waking world or elsewhere. He was still with his children in one form or another.